Hello everybody, welcome to episode 5 of the Big Small Sinetta Show. Now in this episode we're going to be looking at one of the toughest challenges all knitters face, and that's new and experienced knitters alike. We're also going to talk to a designer who's a good friend of mine and one you should know if you don't already, so make sure you watch that. And then we're going to travel all the way to Hackney, England to visit a yarn shop. Trust me, it's definitely worth the trip. So come along with me and let's get started. Gauge. There, I just said it. Is there a word that strikes more terror in the heart of new knitters? I'm not sure that there is. But in this special two-part segment of Knit You, we're actually going to take a look at the gauge, exactly what it is, and what affects it. Yarns and needles, tension, all those factors. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll realize that gauge is not a thing to be feared, but actually just a tool to make sure that your garment is going to come out the size that you want it. So let's go look at exactly what this gauge thing is all about. Hello everybody and welcome to another segment of Knit You. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me, and hopefully at the end of this we'll have departed some information that you have found to be useful. Now, just a reminder, the Knit You segments in this show are not out here to replace teachers and instructors out there. As a matter of fact, we hope that it encourages you to then seek out additional information about whatever it is that you need to know about in the knitting world. Okay, so with that, let's get started. Now, this segment is actually the first of two parts, and this is a special two-part segment because we're going to try and tackle one of the biggest problems knitters have, and that's knitters that are experienced and new knitters alike. So, no, I'm not picking on anybody. From time to time, I even have challenges with this myself. That topic is gauge, and I know I was one of them in the beginning. I would never do a gauge swatch. Now, well, mostly because I do a lot of design work, I have to do gauge swatches for that, obviously. But quite often when I'm doing a new pattern, I will actually do a gauge swatch. The main reason is that I want to make sure that my knitted piece comes out to be exactly the size that I want it to be. So the gauge is very, very, very important. Now, before we can actually get into gauge itself though, and look at how we can change our gauge or make adjustments if we're not getting our correct gauge, we have to look at the yarn, and more specifically, the yarn weights. Now, there's all kinds of yarn out there, and yarn comes in all kinds of weights. Unfortunately, it's also measured in all kinds of ways, and that can be confusing, especially for new knitters. But again, even experienced knitters have issues with the way that yarn can be measured. So for the purposes of this video, we're going to be looking at a generic standard, or well, not really a standard, but a system that's been put in place by the Yarn Craft Council. They're in the United States, and they have labeled the yarns from 0 to 7 for the weights. We will comment on the different weights that are already out there and that you might actually be using, but we will basically be using that standard for them. And if you want to check these out, you can actually go on their website and have a look for yourself. Now, at the end of this, I'm also going to tell you a way that you can measure gauge exactly, regardless of the yarn, regardless of what was told beforehand, and regardless of whether or not you have a label. Because quite often we will just look at our yarn label to find out exactly what the yarn is. But if you don't have a label and you need to find out what the yarn weight is, there is a way, and we will be discussing that at the end of this. Now, the Yarn Council has basically 7 different measurements. I'm going to talk to you about 8 because there's one that wasn't put in there that I think absolutely has to be in there, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. Now, I have examples of quite a few of them here, but I am missing some. Even though there's 8 here, there's actually only 7 because this doesn't have a weight on it, and a couple of these are duplicates. So let's put this aside for now. The first one is 0, and that is also called superfine, I believe. No, 0 is lace. Now, when you're thinking lace, you're thinking gossamer thread. There is a popular shawl that's made, and it's actually made with yarn that's so fine, it's 0-weight yarn, that you can actually pull it through a wedding ring. And it's a fantastic shawl. If you ever find yourself wanting to do that, you should go right ahead. Now, some additional information about 0-weight yarn. It's also called 10-count crochet thread. Sometimes people refer to it as lace weight or fingering or 1 ply. Now, remember when I said that names can be confusing? There is a system of measurement using plies to determine yarn weight. However, telling you how many plies are in the yarn doesn't really tell you anything, because you can have a 3-ply yarn that's the exact same thickness as a 4-ply yarn. A ply is simply a strand of yarn, and most yarns are made up of multiple plies that are then twisted together, spun together, or plied together. So saying that a yarn is a 3-ply or a 6-ply or even like a 5-ply really doesn't tell me anything about the thickness. However, there is a standard, the general standard of measurement, it's used in the UK and Australia mostly, that goes with plies. So I will be mentioning plies from time to time. It's a UK system of measurement. And basically, as the ply increases, so does the thickness of the yarn. Okay, so lace weight yarn is also sometimes referred to as a single, as super fine fingering weight, or a 1-ply yarn. Okay, it generally has somewhere in the vicinity of 32 or more stitches over 4 inches. That's more than 8 stitches per inch, and you're going to be dealing with the thinnest yarn out there. Also, with a 0-weight yarn or lace weight yarn, you're also looking at basically about 550 or more yards per 100 grams. Okay, so sometimes it's important to know how many yards you're getting per 100 grams, because that will give you a rough approximation of where in the scale the yarn falls. The second category of yarn weight is 1, and that is called superfine. And again, it can be referred to sometimes as sock weight, as fingering weight, as I believe 4-ply. Not sure. I think it's, yes, 4-ply or even baby. But again, and you will notice that there is some overlap of some of the names. It's because, take sock weight for example. Sock weight yarn can actually be varying thicknesses. So saying a yarn is sock weight, again, doesn't tell me the exact thickness of it, but it does give me a rough idea, and I can then do some further information and narrow it down. Now this is an example here of a fingering weight yarn, and yes, it is 4-ply, and this is a Cordale sock yarn that I've got. Now this particular one is 100% Cordale sock, and it's a high twist, so it gives you a nice, it gives it nice structure and wearability. And as you can see, it's fairly thin. It's not super thick, but it is a thin yarn. Okay. Now this skein has 400 meters, about 437 yards, and that's 100 grams, and that's right in the area of where your superfine yarns fall. Okay. Most yarns in the superfine category, or weight 1, will give you somewhere in the vicinity of 7 to 8 stitches per inch, or 28 to 32 stitches over 4 inches. So that's your thinner sock yarns and yarns that are predominantly used for things like shawls. Okay, some very, very fine baby clothing, but not that much. Okay. The next yarn weight that is categorized by the council is number 2, which is called fine, or some people call it sport, baby, again, sock. And now we're getting into the thicker sock grade, basically the higher range of your sock weight yarns. Sport yarn is generally knit on needles in and around the 3.75 millimeter range. So, you know, somewhere, say, on the low end, maybe a 3 1/4, high end of 4, probably not much higher than that, however. But yeah, around the 3.75 is almost ideal. And again, these are average. Your tension may change your gauge, and we'll explain that in the next session. So yours may go up or down. I myself would use a 3 1/2 because I'm a loose knitter because of my tension. Make sure you watch the next episode to find out all about that. And with sport weight yarn, you're going to get somewhere around 6 stitches over 4 inches. So probably in the vicinity of 5 to 5.5 to 6.5 stitches per inch, or 22, 24, 23 or so to 26, 27. And there's somewhere between 290 to 360 yards over 100 grams. This one that I have in my hand is a merino alpaca blend. It's really, really nice, and it's 300 meters, and it's a lovely sport weight yarn. And here you can see roughly the thickness of it. Continuing on, we now get to number 3. So this is actually the 4th weight, because we started at 0, and this is 3. Now 3 is called light by the Yarn Council, and most often it's referred to as DK. Now again, with the confusion, DK refers to double knitting, which is actually a type of knitting process where, well, we'll deal with that in another segment. But again, when you say it's DK weight yarn, well, when it's DK yarn, you have to basically specify that you're talking about the weight. Otherwise, there's some confusion going on. You can also call this sock because there is some sock that's in this range. And in terms of a ply, the DK is about an 8-ply. Is not about an 8-ply. The people that refer to this as plies would refer to the DK as an 8-ply. DK ideally comes out to 24 stitches or 22 stitches over 4 inches, which is 5.5 stitches per inch. But again, a heavier DK would be about 21, and a lighter DK would be about 25. So somewhere in that range. And the recommended or average needle size for this is somewhere around 4 millimeters. Again, 4 1/4, 4.5, you're getting thick, and 3.75 is okay. 3.5, you're getting a little thin for DK yarn. You're going to get somewhere in the vicinity of 230, 240 meters over 100 grams. And again, that'll vary just a little bit either way. Okay, that's number 4, that's light or DK. Sorry, DK is number 3, light, and sometimes referred to as light worsted as well. Now we get to number 4, which is medium, and this one causes a lot of confusion, again, because of the naming. Traditionally, this has always been called worsted yarn. Now, worsted is actually a process of spinning yarn. Somebody can refer to a yarn as worsted spun. Can also refer to a yarn as worsted weight, which is what number 4 is. It's a very, very popular weight of yarn to use to make a sweater. A nice medium weight sweater, not too thick, not too light. It's great for mid to late fall and into early spring, but definitely not something you want to be wearing late spring, early fall, or summertime at all. Worsted weight, we'll call this medium. The Yarn Council calls this medium. It comes out at 20 stitches over 4 inches, or 5 stitches per inch. And again, we can go a little bit lower, like 19, and a little bit more to like 21-ish, somewhere in that range. And it's generally knit on about a 4.5 millimeter needle. And again, yours might vary slightly. Okay, that's number 4. That's medium and or worsted weight yarn. So this is the one I'm including in there because I just think that it's a shame to not include this. So I'm going to call this 4B, and this is like just a Hugzzz thing. This is Aran weight yarn. Now, true Aran is 18 stitches over 4 inches, 4.5 stitches per inch, and generally it's knit on about a 5 millimeter needle. Now, you know that I love my cables and Aran weight yarn and everything else, so I think that it deserves its own special category, simply because the worsted is a little thin for Aran, and the next one up, the chunky or bulky that we'll get to, is a little thick. So true Aran should definitely have its own category, and it's right smack in the middle there at 18 stitches or 4.5 stitches per inch. Generally on a 5 millimeter needle, but you can go up to about a 5.5. And if you're loose in there like myself, sometimes a 4.5 will work as well. Okay, so that's just a special inclusion. Don't hold anybody to it. That's just my personal Hugzzz opinion. Okay, so now we come to number 5, which is called bulky. And bulky is a little bit thicker than, bulky is what we used to call chunky. So we're in the vicinity of about 2 3/4 to about 4 stitches per inch, or about, say what, 10 to 16 stitches over 4 inches. And it's a much wider range now than it used to be, because chunky used to be just around 16 stitches, so like say 14 to 16 stitches. You're getting less yardage over 100 grams, so you're looking at somewhere in the vicinity of about 125 meters. Again, a little bit of fluctuation either way. And you're going up on your needle sizes, so now you're going to be using somewhere about 5.5 to a 7 millimeter needle, depending on your particular tension. And that's your bulky. After bulky, we have super bulky, and I don't have an example in front of me of super bulky, but it's thick. This is the stuff that you basically take and you're going to be wrapping around your hand, doing some hand knitting perhaps. It uses big needles, up to about a 20 millimeter needle, and we're looking at about 2 3/4 stitches per inch. So Yeah, where bulky was 10 to 16, super bulky is about, say, 7 to 10 stitches. Oh, that's over 4 inches. So work done in your super bulky is going to knit up really, really quickly. Okay. Likewise, though, you're not getting much yardage. You're getting up to maybe 100 grams or 100 meters in 100 grams, and it's going to go quick. Okay. So after that, you've got this guy, and this is what's called jumbo. This is number 7 on the Yarn Council, and yes, it's like it says, it's jumbo. You can see how thick a strand of that is. Some people refer to this as roving, and well, it's in the same category as your roving or polar. Actually, the super bulky can also be is quite often also referred to as polar. I forgot to mention that. So yes, the jumbo comes. It's big. It's thick, and you're getting a half to 1 stitch per inch. So on this, over 4 inches, you're going to get maybe 3 to 4 stitches. And as you can see, like I said, that's really thick, and this knits up really, really quickly. What size needles do you use for this? Generally, people have been using about a 25 millimeter, which is a US 50. However, I think that they're mistaken, and you should be using these guys. These are big sticks, and literally they are big sticks. These are a 38 millimeter needle, and they knit this perfectly. You get a gauge of about 3/4 of a stitch per inch. So yeah, 3 stitches over 4 inches. And you can knit a blanket in an afternoon, no lie. If you want to, we'll do a review on these in an upcoming episode really soon. And if you want to find out more information about them, you can go to the website bigsticks.ca, and you'll see all kinds of stuff you can knit with them as well. So those are your yarn weights, and again, it's abbreviated. There are, for the most part, you know, if you use that guideline, you'll have an idea of what your yarn weights are, okay, or what yarn you're dealing with. And a lot of yarns now are being much more particular on their labels and telling you what it is. And especially in North America, a lot of people are adopting the Craft Council guidelines for their yarn weights, so it's definitely a lot easier to tell. So remember in the beginning I told you that there was a surefire way to know what weight yarn you were using, regardless of the naming convention that was used, whether it was plies, whether it was the Yarn Council's numbering system of 0 to 7, or whether it was a name like DK or worsted or whichever. Well, now we're going to talk about that. And I actually think that I would love to see all yarn companies, all manufacturers of yarn, and anybody out there that's producing yarn and putting it out there, adopt a system, because it tells you right away exactly what yarn you're dealing with, and it never changes. It doesn't matter whether you're in New Zealand or Australia or in Canada or anywhere. And if you have a skein of yarn like I do here that doesn't have a label, and you know, we know you can't look at yarn and tell what thickness it is, because depending on the fiber composition, it has different a different compression factor. So you know, some yarns will look nice and lofty, but then they just don't, they squish down, and other yarns, like say ones with mohair in them, will squish down really thin, and you think, oh, it's a nice thin yarn, but it's got a lot of loft, and it blooms, as we say, or fills in the little gaps, so it knits up to a much thicker gauge than what it looks like. So that method that I'm talking about is called wraps per inch. And yes, it's exactly what it says. And I'm going to show you exactly how we do a wraps per inch measurement of a yarn. Now, as I said, I don't know what the gauge is on this yarn because it didn't have a label. I don't even know the fiber composition, but there's a way to test that too, and we'll do that another day. So what you do for wraps per inch is you get yourself a ruler, and you're going to need to wrap at least an inch. And it doesn't matter how wide your ruler is or how thick. What you do is you take your yarn and you just wrap it around your ruler over an inch. Now, you don't want these done too tightly or too loosely. I should go the other way, shouldn't I? Ooh, ran out of yarn. What you want to do is just have each wrap sitting right beside the next wrap so that there's no holes and that they don't overlap. And you will get a measurement of how many wraps you'll get of that yarn per inch. And as you can see, as I'm doing this, it really won't matter if I'm wrapping it over like a 6-inch thick ruler or a pencil. It just doesn't matter at all because it's only counting the space in the inch. And I can see by this one that I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 wraps. Let's say, actually I could probably get a 14. Yeah, I can get another one in there. But now if you want to be more accurate, you just do more inches. Like I'll go another inch just to ensure that I've got 26 and then I'll know it's 13.
So I got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 20.
So I've got on here, I've got 27 wraps over 2 inches, so that's 13 and a half. Now, referencing that, I know that anything from about a 12 to 14 wraps per inch is a DK weight yarn. So this yarn is a DK weight yarn, and I know exactly what to do with it now. So wraps per inch, definitely the way to go. And yeah, if we could all get used to that, then it would be fantastic, because then we wouldn't have to worry about what part of the continent we're in. When you say 12 ply, do you mean really thick, or do you mean it's really fine and there's just a lot of plies to it? And this method works with any thickness of yarn, even these big guys here. So this one here, honestly, that's 1 wrap per inch, okay? So I know that I'm dealing with a jumbo weight yarn. I could do this with, well, I won't undo it and do a thing, but I could do it with any weight yarn. It will always work. Wraps per inch, definitely the way to go. Let's start a lobby and get everybody to do it by wraps per inch. Okay, so I hope you've learned a thing or two about yarn weight. And so in our next episode, we're going to continue this discussion and talk about how all this talk about yarn weight coincides with gauge. Okay, so look for that in the next segment of Knit You, and that should be out within the next 2 weeks. Thanks a lot, look forward to it, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. That wasn't so bad, was it? Now, like I said, that was only half of the special 2-part segment that we're doing on gauge. So in the next segment, we'll tackle the rest of it. Make sure you tune in to the next episode of the show to find out all the rest about gauge. Now, I'd like you to travel with me to Washington State, where we're going to talk to a good friend of mine, Claudia, who's also a designer. And she's one you should know. Let's go meet Claudia Barbeau and talk to her about designs. I am here in the store at Apple Yarns, and with me I have Claudia. Claudia, you want to say hi to the millions of people that are watching me right now?
Oh, that makes me feel a lot better. Hi.
And Claudia, you work here at Apple Yarns, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
How long have you been here?
Since the store opened, so 11 years.
Wow!
Yeah.
My goodness, that's amazing. And throughout that time, you've designed quite a few patterns, right?
I have, yes.
You have. Now, for people that don't know about you or whatever, where are your patterns?
My patterns are available on Ravelry.
Okay.
It's under Claudia Barbo.
Okay. And how many do you have?
I probably have about 15 up right now. And
Right.
I was,
And you designed a lot more than that.
I have designed a lot more than that.
Where are the rest?
They're in my head. They're in, literally, I went through the other day and went, I keep finding these little bits and pieces of, gee, that'd be a good idea. And I put them in notebooks, and I have 2 notebooks full of
goodness.
partially done or
Well, how are people supposed to knit your stuff if they're in your notebooks?
well, that means I have to get to work.
But you're a designer.
But true.
Okay, so I'm just having fun with you, seriously. But that leads me to an important question. What's your design process? Do you have an idea and you knit it first, or crochet? Do you crochet as well?
I do, yes.
So you do crochet and knit patterns?
Uh-huh.
That's fantastic, because there's not a lot of people that do both. So do you have an idea and you decide, okay, I'm going to knit this or crochet this, and then write out the pattern? Do you write out the pattern, then knit or crochet it, or do you do a combination of the both?
A combination, and sometimes it's just seeing a beautiful skein of yarn and going, oh, I got to do something with that.
Right.
So, I don't have any one distinct pattern that I do.
Right.
It's kind of a process of just. Sometimes I draw it out, but I have the drawing skills of an amoeba, so I'm afraid nobody else would know what these pictures are about. And sometimes it's just a design that I like, a pattern I like, or a view that I've seen and thought, there's got to be a way to knit that in something.
Right,
So.
right. Do you ever stop people when you see them wearing something cool and say, hey, where'd you get that? Or can I take a picture? Or
Sometimes, most of the time, I just do the looking and trying not to look obvious, but
But you still
yeah,
do.
and then go back and draw it in with my amoeba skills.
Amoeba skills. What kind of stuff do you like to design? Or what have you designed? Well, you've designed everything. I've seen
Yeah.
the shawls and
Yeah.
vests and hats and sweaters. So, but what do you, if you were going to make something for yourself or design something for yourself, what would it be?
It would be a sweater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, I'd love doing hats just because they're so fun and quick, and you can try out all sorts of things with them. But for me, in fact, I've got one sort of going already of what I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
It's actually one that it was the very first sweater I designed, and I designed it for my daughter. They have those 365 a day stitch a day calendars.
The perpetual ones. Yeah, I have one of
And
those.
so she was into a thing of always taking the day of her birthday off. So that is the stitch that was on her birthday.
Oh,
so
nice. There you go.
But I want to now revisit it and try it again.
Try it again. Cool. What made you decide to design? Like, you weren't happy just knitting what was out there?
Well, I started thinking that maybe I could do that too.
Mm-hmm.
It just sort of happened. It wasn't a thing of sitting down one day of going, I'm going to design patterns. It was, well, I think I'm going to try this and see what happens. And it's worked out rather nicely, actually.
Excellent. Good. And do you tech edit your patterns, or do you get them test knitted?
I get them test knitted. I have several people who are really good at test knitting for me. And I have one person who does the tech editing.
Mm-hmm.
And I have somebody that I send it to make them pretty for when they go up in Ravelry.
Okay, so that's like the photography of it and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Through the magic of, I guess, online television, whatever, you have magically found yourself a shawl.
That's
Now,
right.
I understand this is one of your new designs?
It is. It's my newest design, yeah.
Okay, and what is this one called?
This is called Zephyrus.
Right.
It's after the Greek god of the spring wind.
Ooh,
Yeah.
good timing.
I thought so.
And what yarns do you use in this?
I use Sparkling Cider, which is the darker color, and then Delicious by Apple Fiber. Both of them by Apple Fiber Studio.
Wow, that's awesome. Can we have you just do a quick little turn and see that? Very, very nice. And I understand you've got it knit up in a couple other different colors as well?
I do, yes.
Okay. Perfect. Claudia, I know there's millions of people watching you, and some of those are thinking, oh, that's really neat. I'd love to try that. Or I think I can do that. I can be a designer. Do you have any advice for budding designers out there?
Go for it. Just get out there and try it. Because for years I designed things and just kind of put them aside. Well, nobody would want to do those. And you get better and better all the time, and it's well worth doing that. It's great.
We have one more thing to do, and I don't like to give any warning for this.
Okay.
It's just a little bit of fun here. So this is what I call either or.
Okay.
And as the title suggests, it's either or. You can't pick both or a substitute. Okay? Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay. Knit or crochet?
Knit.
Knit or purl?
It's not fair. Knit.
Fingering or worsted?
Fingering.
Pullover or cardigan?
Cardigan.
Black or white?
Black.
Color or texture?
Texture.
So that kills that one. Okay, cables or fair isle?
That's tough. Cables.
Yes.
Your work here is done, right?
My work here is done. Marvel or DC?
Marvel.
Really? Come on. Batman. Batman. Why does nobody pick DC? Okay. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for playing. Another thing that we love to do on the show, Claudia, is give away stuff to the viewers that are out there. And I understand you're giving away one of your patterns.
I am.
Excellent. So what we'll do is that we'll put up this post on Instagram, and it'll be on your Instagram page. And what's your Instagram name?
Warrior Librarian.
Warrior Librarian. I like that.
And librarian spelled with a Y, not an I.
Okay. So what they'll have to do then is go and follow you on Instagram and tag 3 of their friends on this post. And then they'll get entered into a draw, and they'll be able to pick any one of your patterns, and
Perfect.
You'll send it out to them.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Sounds
Thank you
good.
so much, Claudia.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Claudia, for sharing that fascinating look into that even more fascinating mind of yours. Now, believe me, everybody, there's lots more to it than we could have possibly done in that brief little interview, even a very much longer interview. So make sure that you enter the contest and you can win one of her patterns, and definitely check her out online through the links that we provided. Now, I'd like you to join me on as we go all the way to Hackney, England, and talk to a new friend of mine, Anne, who has a yarn shop called Wild and Woolly. It's a fascinating little shop. But instead of me telling you about it, why don't you come with me, and Anne will show you and tell you herself. Hello, everybody. I am here in Clapton. Yes, the north part of Hackney in London, England, and come quite a ways, but we are here at the Wild and Woolly yarn shop, and this is the owner. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's Anna, and I have a wool shop called Wild and Woolly.
Nice. So, Anna, how long have you been here?
It's been just over 5 years.
Just over 5 years.
Celebrated the 5th birthday at the beginning of May.
Nice. And have you always been here at this location?
Yes, I live just down the road, so
Nice.
this is a very local spot for me.
Nice. And were you involved in the yarn industry before this, or?
Only as a hobbyist, like
Right.
quite a serious hobbyist, but my work was in web development, so
Oh my gosh,
nothing to
this
do
is-
with knitting. And but knitting was what I did
Right.
by night,
Right.
and web development was what I did by day. And I was kind of into a whole bunch of fibre arts, but knitting
Right.
especially. I
Right.
dabbled with felting and weaving and spinning, but yeah,
But knitting was a
knitting's
thing.
where my heart is. Yeah.
Do you crochet as well?
No.
No.
Sorry.
Okay. That's nothing to be sorry about. There's a lot of us that just do one or the other,
Yeah.
and some of us that do both.
I
That's
mean,
all good.
I'm very fond of crochet.
Yeah,
They're very
of
welcome
course.
here. But I know how to crochet and I can help people with basic problems, but I don't feel nearly as confident with crochet as
Right.
knitting.
That's exactly the same with me. I do crochet, but not nearly as much as the knitting. Knitting, you can ask me anything, and I'll probably know.
Yeah.
So, what made you decide to open up a yarn shop?
I'd done my previous job for about 15 years and had a period in the beginning of really feeling very driven and motivated, and I guess like a lot of people somehow lost my kind of real passion for what I was doing, and just was feeling like work was not pressing my buttons anymore.
Right.
And not through any fault of the workplace or my colleagues or my clients, just like my heart wasn't in it. And obviously the landscape in terms of online development stuff has changed a lot and
Oh
had
my
become
gosh.
much more commercial, and it was a different kind of, I guess, just a different area that I was working in. And so I was looking at a change in life direction, and that takes you back to thinking about what you really love doing. And I love knitting.
How have you found being a yarn shop owner?
I've really loved it. I guess I opened the shop because I love knitting, and that kind of seemed like a good start. And I thought, I know a lot about knitting, I can solve people's knitting problems, and I know a lot about wool, and so that is presumably, that's all that's needed. But I've never run a shop before, so I guess what I've learned since opening the shop is that actually what I really love is being a shopkeeper. And it's kind of handy that not handy, it's critical that I have that expertise to run a wool shop, because that's my stuff. And I believe very strongly in the whole idea of expert retail. I think it's something that is, we don't really have so much left of anymore.
No, we don't.
But I think that it's the kind of being a shopkeeper, it's like I discovered that's my thing, and I'm much happier being a shopkeeper than I've been being anything else. And
Well, you're absolutely glowing right now, so it's obvious that you enjoy this. So that's fantastic, because it's not all fun and games, as people don't realize. Like, I'm sure your knitting time has been cut in at least a half, if not more, right?
yeah. There's a kind of myth that, and people even say to me that, oh, what a lovely job, you can just sit around knitting all day. Obviously, I never managed to do any knitting in the daytime at all. Running your own business takes a lot of work. And there's a lot more to it than, just peddling the wool. I knit in the evenings, and, like any busy person, you eke out bits of time. But I also have found that my knitting habits have changed a bit. I think once you make something to do with your hobby into your work, it can change your attitude towards it, and it's no longer it no longer performs the role of being an escape from the day's travails. It's not something to retreat to necessarily, because often my projects are led by requirements in the shop, and that kind of gives them a different kind of, I guess, a different sort of priority and urgency that doesn't necessarily make them kind of relaxing things to get on with, and I think I've had to kind of, me and knitting have kind of gone on a journey.
Yes. So. the parameters of your relationship has changed.
Yeah, in a way. I also kind of have come to think that perhaps there's something slightly bipolar in my knitting behaviour. Maybe that's true of a lot of people. Your audience may relate to that, but I definitely have my peaks and troughs with knitting.
Right. I think we all do.
And I can go through periods of incredible productivity, often at quite counterintuitive times of year. So last summer, when the weather was really hot in London, I was averaging a sweater every 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, I was really knocking them out.
In hot weather.
I don't know what that was about, why I was so prompted. Maybe also because business is slow at that time of year. But, you know, since February, I don't know that I've finished very much at all. So, I've definitely been in a bit of a slump lately, but I'm coming out of it now.
Excellent. So, tell us about the shop. I've noticed a couple, like there's woad indigo dyed mini skeins right there.
Well, that's an
like
interesting. That one is very new. Only arrived the other day and came from a hand dyer in Norfolk, in the east of England, in East Anglia, where woad is grown. So woad is the native plant, British plant in Britain that is a source of indigo. And it's actually grown in the garden of the woman who's dyeing with
amazing.
it. So I really enjoy making those sorts of connections where there's a story and a tangible story, let's say, between the provenance of the yarn or the dyeing and the product that I'm selling here. So there's a lot of the yarns in the shop come from very small producers, not necessarily one woman show businesses. That's a particular one. But there's a bit of hand dyed yarn up here above me. Is the 2 hand dyers who are very local, just up the road, and they are a very big part of the shop.
And who are they?
The Travel Knitter is a dyer who has an incredibly saturated colour approach to dyeing.
Love it.
She does these amazing jewel tones using a technique with sort of layered dyeing. It's very long-winded and very beautiful and gives an incredible depth of colour. So the Wool Kitchen also is from just up the road, and she's a dyer called Helen who dyes in her kitchen, hence the name. And she has a much more cosmic style of dyeing, as you can see from the colours. And she's a really interesting one because she's very keen on taking her starting point as how she wants the fabric to look once it's knitted. She's very, I think there's a tendency sometimes with hand dyeing to focus on what the skein will look like, and she's wants to make sure that you enjoy every stitch of the knitting, so you never get pooling and unpleasant looking fabric with her yarns that she's dyed. So they're hand painted and they're absolutely beautiful. And both of these dyers have been a really important part of the shop and kind of bring a lot of inspiration and joy to this place.
Nice. So do you tend to focus on local source
not enormously, no. I mean, in fact, I've made a decision not to give too much space to hand-dyed yarn in the shop just because from a business perspective it's quite difficult to make that work. So they're about as local as it gets. I'm quite keen I focus on European and British yarns mainly. Nice. And there are some yarns where the wool comes from South America as well. But on the whole, my focus is I'm interested in local, but I'm interested in building relationships with the people who make the yarn, and so I quite like those companies where there's real people with kind of real stories to tell about how they came to be manufacturing wool or alpaca. Yeah,
it's fantastic. And then you have quite a bit of accessories here. I mean, you've got quite a bit in such a space, and it's neatly laid out, and So.
The shop was refurbished about 4 months ago after a long process of planning. So I ran a wool shop for, I guess, 4.5 years, discovering what worked and what didn't, and was then able to put that knowledge into making the space a bit better for I think it's quite important in a wool shop that the people who walk in don't feel overwhelmed, and at the same time, you know, you want all the yarn. It's a balancing act, right? You have to kind of hold. Right. You got to make the space feel interesting and vibrant, but also like there's room to think. It's quite it's a challenge.
Right. And did you have lessons here as well?
Yeah, so because the shop's quite small, lessons tend to happen when the shop's closed in the evenings and Sunday mornings. And other events as well. There's various social events. Yeah, once a month I open the shop at night. I go home at 6 p.m. when I close up and have a meal with my family and come back at 8 p.m. to open up again. Wow. And there's always a queue of people waiting outside.
When's your next night?
It's the second Wednesday in the month, and everyone is always welcome. There's no booking, you just rock up. Wow. But it gets really, really full. So we commonly have like 25, 30 people in here, which is difficult to imagine, but that's because it is kind of difficult. Ram everybody. It's very jolly, very rosy-cheeked.
Do they bring their own chairs?
There's lots of chairs stacked up in the back. There's lots of wine and lots of cake. Oh, man. And it's a great time
Wednesday, huh?
Get inspiration. There's just the most extraordinary knitwear, but also people who are just starting out. And one of the things I love about it is that I don't think anyone ever arrives feeling like they're not, that there isn't a place for them. You know, there's one of the people who always comes is in her 80s. There's people in the early 20s, and and there's plenty of men too. Not as many as women, I'm sorry to say, but
no, but that's good to see.
You know, it's not. There's no one group you can pin it on. It's a real array, and and there's always new people, and because this is Hackney. You know, a lot of different accents as well, and different languages, and a lot of nice baking. And then lately, last couple of months, I've started having another evening which sits between that monthly knit night, so 2 weeks after the knit night basically, and before the next knit night. I open the shop in the evening, just when the shop closes at 6:30, and it's a quieter thing. It's a book. We're calling it a book club, the long tail book club, but not a book club where you read and discuss. It's, you don't prepare for it. It's where people read short stories while you knit, so you can just sit and listen.
Excellent.
And it's been a really nice thing. It's it's a knit night with a very different spirit from the other one. It's and it's the knitters who read stories. They're not performers, but turns out they read very well, and it's a really lovely thing to listen to a story while you're knitting.
Okay, and so tell me about the knitting community here. Like, what's the demographics like?
It's really difficult to pin it down. It's a very mixed area in every possible way, socially, ethnically, and in knitting terms, skills-wise and age-wise. There's a growing professional class, I guess, whilst this area of London is traditionally quite poor. It's much more mixed than it used to be because of gentrification. There's kind of old timer knitters that want the brands that used to, you know, were around in the 70s, who would, you know, where you had that, the knitting patterns and the yarn all coming from the same company, and then you've got more newfangled knitters who are much more savvy with Ravelry and following their favourite designers on Instagram and, you know, keeping up with knit-alongs from in the indie knitting scene. And then there's, you know, new beginner type knitters that have heard that there's some mindfulness, well-being issues that they can get from knitting, and don't really have a clue about the scene at all, but just kind of have heard it's a nice thing to get into. So there's like a whole array of.
So you got the whole gambit.
Oh, totally, yeah. And then, you know, in this shop, there's people that have just kind of made it their own.
Right.
So, you know, it has been noted that the shop is slightly turned into a kind of knitting version of the Cheers bar.
But that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no, it can be very
amazing.
nice. So, and it makes a lot of sense out of the decision to put quite a big table in quite a small shop, because the table is like, you know,
it's like the kitchen at a party.
Absolutely, and it's where people congregate, and a lot of, you know, sorting out of knitting problems and life problems goes on there, which is very nice.
Amazing.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Well, I can't tell you how wonderful and welcome I've felt being in here. Like, it's just
very
amazing.
pleased to
And
hear
the
that.
tea and cookies, like,
Hi.
that's just amazing. Anna, I know that people are going to, obviously, hopefully people watching this decide, okay, I live just down the road, I'm going to have to go check that shop out. But for the people that can't get here, how do they find you? And, you know, how are they able to get your goods? Like, do you ship and all that kind of stuff? And yeah, give us your info.
So I have a website which lists all the products that are in the shop, and as far as possible they're shown as they are in the shop. You can see the yarns in the cubbies. The yarn is organised by gauge and by brand, and if you can't find something, you can search for it or you can just contact me. I ship all over the world.
What's the website address?
The website address is wildandwoollyshop.co.uk.
Okay.
Woolly's got 2 L's and spelt out AND. And yeah, that's it.
You mentioned Ravelry earlier. You're on Ravelry?
I'm on Ravelry. I'm not very active on Ravelry.
Is it like you personally, or is it your shop?
The shop.
The shop.
Oh, I
Okay.
do have a personal account on Ravelry too, and I'm involved with Ravelry at the level of being part of the in-store pattern program. So I sell Ravelry patterns through the shop,
Nice.
and also you can find the shop listed against yarns that I sell. So if you are looking up a pattern that calls for one of the yarns I sell, you may well see the shop listed in the corners. Because there's a few yarns here that I'm the only stockist of in London, so you're likely to see the shop listed that way as well.
Cool. Can you tell us a couple of those? Is that putting you on the spot?
No, that's okay. That linen at the top there,
Okay.
that's a Swedish linen called Kalinka. And there's the only stockist in London of that. There's a couple of other stockists in the UK. The Durarum Natura Gilead and Ulysses and Cyrano. I'm the only stockist of that yarn. That's a nice one from a small producer in France, made Alpine Merino. And the Portuguese wool from Rosa Pomar. There's Mondim and Mungo and Vovo. There's a bunch of those European yarns.
That's amazing. Cool. And is the shop on Instagram?
Yeah, I try to post daily. I don't often manage it.
That's okay.
I'm a kind of slack Instagrammer, but I do my best to post as often
And what's
as I can.
the Instagram handle? Is it
That's
just
Wild and Woolly Shop. Wild and Woolly Shop on Instagram, W and Woolly on Twitter, Wild and Woolly Shop on Facebook.
Okay. And it's been amazing chatting with you.
It's a pleasure.
I am definitely going to have to come back for one of your knit nights. That's going to be
You're
so
very
cool.
welcome to. That would be lovely.
That'd be fantastic. Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Can't tell you what a delight it was to meet Anne and check out her shop, Wild and Woolly. I will definitely be going back to one of those knit nights on Wednesday. It sounds like such a great event. Now, if you can't get there, make sure that you check her out online. It's definitely worth a few clicks on your computer. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of It Takes Balls to Knit the Show. I'd like to thank the Craft Yarn Council for their resources online with regarding Gauge, and remind you to come back for our next episode where we're going to continue that conversation about Gauge. I'd also like to thank Claudia and Anne for spending their time with us and sharing a little bit of their expertise. Make sure you check out both of those people online. Lastly, but definitely not least, I'd like to thank you for choosing to spend this time with me. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to get notification of all future episodes when they come up, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. You can do that by clicking on the link below and just ringing that bell. Also, we have a close-knit community on our website, ittakesballstoknit.com, and we'd love for you to be a member of that. Until I see you again, happy knitting, or as my friend Joey would say, that's a wrap. Well, that brings us to the ending of another episode of It Takes Balls to Knit the Show. Hopefully you enjoyed that and you'll be along for many, many more in the future. If that's the case and you'd like to... Well, that brings us to the episode... Jeez. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of It Takes Balls to Knit the Show. Hopefully you enjoyed that as much as I did making it.